Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Jerry Warburg with the Batten School, and it is my privilege to kick off the ceremonies tonight. TJ Mason, the head of the Batten student body, is going to have the honor of introducing our very distinguished guest, Governor Martin O'Malley. Thank you so much, TJ.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Terry Mason, and I'm a second-year Master's of Public Policy student here at the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, and the president of the Batten Graduate Council. I'm here this evening to welcome you all to the Leadership Forum and introduce to you all our keynote speaker of the semester, Governor Martin J. O'Malley. The Batten Council selected Governor O'Malley as our keynote speaker, knowing that he embodies the same traits of leadership reflected in the class speakers who have come before him. These nonpartisan speakers include the late Ted Sorensen, advisor to President Kennedy, and the Honorable Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. We're excited and honored to host the governor with us here today. While Governor O'Malley has just recently stepped into the national spotlight, his career in public service began quite some time ago. From 1991 to 1999, Governor O'Malley served on the Baltimore City Council. From there, he would choose to run for mayor of Baltimore, serving from 1999 to 2007, moving on to become the 61st governor of Maryland, a position he would hold until January of this year. While many would have been comfortable, overwhelmed, or perhaps even grown complacent with this achievement, Governor O'Malley chose to serve both his party and nation by acting as the chair of the Democratic Governors Association from 2011 to 2013. I must also note that one of our first alumni, Nick Fight, served as a summer policy fellow with the governor's administration. Now, while his lengthy career in public service is certainly commendable, what may be most noteworthy and of particular interest is the governor's approach to policy, and that is one of innovation, data-driven innovation. While Governor O'Malley stepped into his role as mayor in December of 1999, the city suffered from rampant absenteeism, leading to high overtime costs and an extensive burden on the city's finances. To tackle this problem, Governor O'Malley implemented CitiStat, a data tracking and management tool that enabled the mayor's office to monitor overtime and sick leave in real time. In the first year of implementation, the city would save an estimated $13.2 million. The city now uses this data-driven system to manage all city programs and services, from criminal investigations to pothole repair, saving the city an estimated $350 million to date. Following the successes of this program in Baltimore, it has been implemented in 11 cities across the United States. Now, to the national spotlight. Governor O'Malley has also been at the forefront of some of the greatest public policy issues of our time. In 2011, he signed a law that would make undocumented immigrants brought to the United States as children eligible for in-state college tuition. The following year, in 2012, he signed a law to legalize same-sex marriage in the state of Maryland, well before the Supreme Court's 2015 decision in Obersville v. Hodges, which guaranteed nationally the right of same-sex couples to be wed. The issues that Governor O'Malley has led on in the public sector arena in which he has implemented these changes are those that we at the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy analyze, discuss, and study on a daily basis. So, without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to the Batten School, to our Leadership Forum, former Mayor of Baltimore, former Governor of Maryland, and now 2016 presidential candidate, Governor Martin J. O'Malley.
Thanks very, very much. Wow. Hey, thank you very, very much. It's a great honor to be here with you and to be on the grounds. Yeah, so I'm learning the lingo here. And Professor Warburg, thank you very, very much. And TJ Mason, thank you for your kind introduction. I also want to thank the dean of your business school. I want to thank Dean Zeithamel for being here with us, and I also especially want to thank him for giving to our campaign one of our greatest assets, and that is Kevin Zeithamel, who's right over there. Kevin is engaged right now in, what shall we call it, Kevin? Experiential learning. Kevin rides with me day in and day out, and one of the things I want to share with you, which I never quite realized until I ran for president, is just how frequently a person running for president will turn to the person next to him and say, "What day of the week is it?" And very oftentimes, Dean, your son answers back, "It's still Tuesday, sir." It's still Tuesday. So, look, I'm psyched to be with you guys, and I'm very interested in getting to the part where we do questions and answers. And by golly, if you have answers, I'd like to hear from you first. Because I am in a search for answers, and no one candidate and no one party has all of the answers to the challenges that we face as a people. But together, there is no challenge that is too great for us to overcome as a people and as a nation. And so I wanted to share a few thoughts with you. And by the way, before I forget, I want to plant this seed. Did you know that your state requires people running for president to actually collect signatures to get on your ballot? I have to collect 7,700 by December 10th. So you, as individuals and as a group, could really help me a lot tonight. It doesn't mean you're committed. It just means you're committed to having a choice. And it would be a poor party indeed if only 2 people were running for president, wouldn't it? So you have 3. You have 3. Provided you get me on the ballot in Virginia. So look, where is Molly? Molly is right there, and Rashawn, 2 of our great staff people here. Molly came down from Maryland. She rarely ever leaves Maryland, never crosses the Potomac without a passport, but today she did. And we have people that'll be circulating with clips, or rather with, sign-up sheets. So if you are a Virginia voter, or resident, right, we would like you to sign our petition. And together, we'll make history. So look, let me share a few thoughts with you. I know that when a man stands before you with 7% national support, he tells you he's running for president of the United States, and it's going very well. That there's a fine line between delusion and imagination. But I'm not delusional about this. All over the country, I keep hearing 2 phrases again and again and again. And they are the phrases, new leadership and getting things done. I believe that our nation is looking for a new leader to pull us forward out of these rather divided and self-defeating times when the polarization in our Congress seems like it's going to shut down our federal government every 3 or 4 months. And you guys know that no people ever gave their kids or the next generation greater opportunities by shutting down their government or by making their own country weaker. That's not the way that it works. So tonight I wanted to share a few thoughts with you about new leadership, about getting things done. And hopefully in the course of this conversation here in this very, very historic place, we can also have a broader conversation about the rights and the liberties, not only of your generation, but the rights and the liberties of the generations that will follow yours. Because as Americans, you and I share something pretty important. It is what has made us a beacon to people all around the world. It is our belief in the dignity of every person, our belief in our own responsibility to advance the common good we share, and our understanding that that common good is something that we share not only here and now among ourselves, but with the people that will come after us. It's what makes life worth living. So look, I was raised one of 6 children to Tom and Barbara O'Malley, 2 of the most loving and generous people that God ever put on the planet. And they were born into the Great Depression. But my mom and dad were also part of that generation that Tom Brokaw dubbed the greatest generation. And the coolest thing about that generation is that they would never, ever take that title upon themselves. You know? They taught us that every generation of Americans has a responsibility to do great things. They, like many of your own parents, they taught us to love God, to love our family, to love our country. But they also taught me something that I didn't appreciate, was not such standard fare around dinner and kitchen tables. And that is to believe that politics is actually a noble and a giving service to others. And that the only thing wrong with politics is not enough good people bother to try. And so, After I graduated from Gonzaga College High School in Washington, D.C. Any Gonzaga graduates here, by the way? There we go. All right, man. Eagles fly high. There's always one. After I graduated from Gonzaga, I moved to Baltimore to go to law school. Actually, I went to Catholic U in between, so fair credit. Any Catholic U people here? No, because this is UVA. But I went to University of Maryland. I see a Maryland scarf out there, huh? Went to University of Maryland for law school. And I stayed in Baltimore. I worked for a woman named Barbara Mikulski on her campaign. Prior to that, as a volunteer, I took a semester off of college, and I worked for a totally unknown presidential candidate that year who was totally counted out. It was a senator from Colorado, the inevitable front-runner of the year. There's always an inevitable front-runner, was Walter Mondale. And the unknown candidate I worked for was a man named Gary Hart from Colorado, who spoke over the horizon to where we were going as a country, spoke about the actions we needed to take in order to give ourselves a better future, a more secure future. At the time, this was back in 1984, he warned that if America did not make herself energy independent, we would find ourselves bogged down for years in a series of wars in the Middle East at the cost of great numbers of American lives. You know, leadership isn't about reading polls. Leadership is about seeing, thinking about, and taking action to shape the future. You know, when I got out of law school, my very first job was as a state's attorney. I went into the Western District of Baltimore City every day. It was my first job, 80 cases, and I did the best I could to deal justice in about 5 hours of docket time. And partly, I suppose, out of the frustration of that, seeing that our city was becoming ever more violent and ever more addicted, I decided to run for office myself. And my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, Katie, said to me, when I told her that I wanted to run against the chairman of the Baltimore City Senators, I was 27 years old, she said, "This guy's going to beat you like a drum." And she said, "You have no idea how the signs are going to come out of nowhere on the yards for this guy." Well, he didn't beat me like a drum, but he did beat me. They say I lost by 22 votes on the absentee ballots. That's what they say. The next year, the seat opened on the Baltimore City Council. Not expecting that would be my path, I ran, and I won. And I served 2 terms on that Baltimore City Council, doing my very best, trying to point out that other cities were figuring out how to reduce drug overdoses. Other cities were figuring out how to make their city a safer place. Why couldn't Baltimore? And at the end of those 8 years, with now 3 kids growing older, and my wife restless that I actually have a real law practice, I moved my practice out of the city to the county, took over a friend's practice who had been elected judge. And then that year, a funny thing happened. Nobody who could turn our city around would offer themselves to run in order to do it. You see, by 1999, our city had become the most violent, addicted, and abandoned city in America. And against that backdrop, after a few restless nights, I finally turned to my wife and I said, "Look, you got to let me try. Because if I don't try, if we don't try, hundreds and hundreds of guys, mostly guys, young and poor and black, are going to die. And I can't live the rest of my life thinking I could have made a difference and I didn't try." And so we did. With only 88 days to go. One of my opponents in the majority African-American city, and both of my 2 opponents were African-American, one had 90% name recognition, one had 80% name recognition, and on the day I announced, I was the whopping first choice of 7% of my neighbors. And that's when I knew I had them. And we had a larger conversation, as you might imagine, on the issues of public safety and policing the police. There is no more difficult issue for us to wrestle with in public policy than the issues of race and law enforcement that are so painfully intertwined in our country's legacy of slavery. But we had a large conversation about justice and injustice, and about how no one should have to live in fear 24/7 of drug dealers and murder gangs in their neighborhood. And if the police responded to 911 calls in a certain way in wealthier neighborhoods, black or white, they should respond the same way in poorer neighborhoods. And at the end of that election, I won every single council district, including the 2 council districts of my opponents. And we put our city on a path for the biggest crime reduction of any major city in America. We greatly expanded drug treatment, and I'll be damned, some of these government programs actually work. We drove overdose deaths down every year. We drove down discourtesy, brutality, drove fatal police-involved shootings down to their 3 lowest years of the 4 lowest on record to this date. And did we make perfect? No, we did not make perfect. And we were not able to make our city immune to future setbacks. But we were able to make progress. We won the Innovations in Government Award from the Kennedy School at Harvard. And do you know what our innovation was? We started measuring the outputs of government instead of the inputs. We started mapping all of our requests for service. And I'll be darned, something never done before in a democracy. We started using this new thing called the internet and GIS to put all of those services online, on a map. We started giving out customer service numbers. We put 311 on the front end, just like we had always had 911 on the front end for policing services. And we were able to show our citizens that from whatever neighborhood you call, whether it's for a pothole or a dead tree or what have you, everybody gets the same service request and expectation of time frame within which to have it filled. And slowly, but surely, and with action and not words, we restored the fabric of trust that ultimately has to exist in any city for it to make progress. In 2006, I ran against an incumbent Republican governor and defeated him. And then, no sooner had I been sworn in, than it seemed like the whole roof caved in on our economy. Because of excesses on Wall Street, crash of 2008, found ourselves in a situation where millions of people were losing their jobs, millions of people were losing their homes. And against that backdrop, we had to move our state forward. There were no popular decisions to make. There were no perfect decisions to make. But every day, I strive to make the best decisions possible to move us forward together. And during my time in office, I followed what I believe is really the genius of our nation. And that is, we took actions to include more people more fully in the economic, the social, and political life of our state. We emerged from the recession faster than our neighbors here in the Commonwealth of Virginia or in Pennsylvania. We defended the highest median income through every year of that recession, maintained a AAA bond rating through every year of the recession, and we did a few other things along the way. It's about inclusion of more people more fully. We were the first state to pass a living wage. We raised the minimum wage. We raised our goals for minority and women business inclusion to the highest in the country, and then we exceeded them in a recession. We made it easier, here's a radical idea, we made it easier for people to vote instead of harder for people to vote. We expanded early voting. I restored voting rights to 52,000 of our citizens who had old felony convictions. We drove violent crime down to our lowest levels in 35 years, but get this, we also drove our incarceration rate down to 20-year lows. It was about actions, not words. And along the way, we passed marriage equality, and we passed the DREAM Act, and then we defended them at the ballot when they tried in a cynical attempt to defeat them at the ballot. We weren't able to accomplish it the first time, but on the third try, we repealed the death penalty. And after the slaughter of all those kids in the classroom in Connecticut, I brought our people together. And it wasn't easy, but we passed comprehensive gun safety legislation with a ban on combat assault weapons and universal background checks. All of these things were about action. All of these things were about actions. They weren't about words. The freedom of Exodus was not merely a freedom from oppression. It was a freedom for full participation and inclusion. So what does any of that have to do with the here and now and the decision before you in this election for president? I believe it has a great deal. My wife Katie and I have 4 terrific kids, 2 girls, 2 boys. And true story, my oldest daughter Grace is a first grade teacher at Walter P. Carter Elementary School in Baltimore City. And 4 months ago, after her dad announced for president, she returned to her first grade class. And a little girl named Sabina came up to her. This adorable, 100% African-American group of first graders. And she tugged on her sleeve and she said, "Miss O'Malley, I'm not so sure about this idea of your father running for president. Because quite frankly, I kind of like Barack Obama." Well, a lot of us like Barack Obama. When our country was this close to a second Great Depression, we, as our party often does, put forward a new leader to lead us out of it. And now the good news is this. We can look over our shoulders now as Americans and see that we have now created 68 months in a row of positive month-over-month job growth. That is the very good news. Our country is headed in a better direction. We can applaud for that, right? The tougher truth of our times that we also need to own, especially as Democrats, if we're going to continue to lead our country forward, is this. While our country is doing better, most people are not feeling it. 70% of us are now earning the same or less than we did 12 years ago. And my fellow Americans here at the University of Virginia, that is not how our economy is supposed to work. That is not how our country is supposed to work. And that is not the American dream when it is real and true. The great poet laureate of the American dream, Bruce Springsteen, once asked, "Is a dream a lie if it don't come true? Or is it something worse?" When that dream becomes a lie, it manifests itself in a lot of really, really bad ways, including rocks in the hands of unemployed young men in the heart of American cities. Manifests itself in ways that make it seem to all of us like our country's on the verge of tearing itself apart. The hard truth we have to own is this. There is still, because of 30 years of very exclusive, trickle-down economic theories put into practice, crucified into dogma, there is a concentration of wealth and power that has been created in our country that is literally taking opportunity out of the homes of the many in order to concentrate wealth in the hands of the few. And this sort of injustice does not solve itself. We have to solve it. You and me, together, as thinking, rational people, we have to solve this. The truth is, our middle class is shrinking, and our poorest families are becoming poorer, and it doesn't need to be this way. So what do we do about it? First and foremost, we need only return to our true selves and remember that our economy is not money. Our economy is people. It is all of our people. And therefore, we must restore common sense, wage and labor policies back to the center of our equation as Americans. What am I talking about? I'm talking about making sure that no family that works hard for a living ever has to raise their kids in poverty. And so just as our parents and grandparents, yes, we must keep the minimum wage above the poverty line at all times and raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, however and wherever we can. We should pay overtime pay for overtime work. We should make it easier and not harder for people to join labor unions and bargain collectively for better wages. We should make it easier and not harder for women to fully participate in our workforce and pay equal pay for equal work. These are the things that we do to include people more fully in the economic success of our country. Instead of cutting Social Security, we need to expand Social Security. And I've put forward a plan to do that and to pay for it so it's there when you need Social Security in your later years as well. And you want to get wages to go up rather than down? Here's an idea. We practice it for the better part of our life as a nation. Let's get 11 million of our neighbors out of the underground, off-the-books shadow economy by passing comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. It's about inclusion. It is about participation. And I hope you will stand with me when you hear the sort of words spewing from people like that carnival barker Donald Trump, and say along with me that Mr. Trump, the enduring symbol of our country is not the barbed wire fence. It is the Statue of Liberty. We are better than this as a nation. And one of the things that I love about your generation is I hardly ever run into people, Americans under 30, that want to deny that climate change is real, that want to bash new American immigrants, that want to slam the door on Syrian refugees and their families. We are a good, compassionate, and generous nation. Second big thing we need to do, make investments in our own country. Look, many of you here at the School of Leadership and Public Policy, some of you study economics, all of you have an awareness of history. Nations do not build up generational wealth by locking cash in a closet. We expand opportunity in every generation and build generational wealth and prosperity by investing in the things that actually pay a return for generations. What are some of those things? Research and development into cures, solutions to human problems. Infrastructure, right? Our roads, our highways, increasingly our cyber infrastructure. A third thing that we invest in is our cities. 80% of America's GDP comes from metropolitan economies. And the center of those economies are also the places where, sadly, in places like Baltimore, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Miami, and Los Angeles, unemployment is higher now than it was when President Obama was elected 8 years ago. We need to make the investments in our cities that actually make our metro economies grow, and I'll be putting out a proposal to do just that tomorrow, but I preview it here at UVA. The other investments we make that pay off for generations, and you know what this one is, your own brain power. Look, Tom Friedman himself said that one of the geniuses of our nation is that in every generation, we educate our people at higher and better levels so that they compete in an economy that's ever changing. And we need to get back to doing that again. Look how far the pendulum has swung. My dad went to college on the GI Bill. I went through college virtually debt-free. Took me a couple years to pay it off, but debt-free. My daughters went to college, not on a GI Bill, but on a mountain of bills. One graduated from Georgetown, the other graduated from College of Charleston. Their mother and I were very proud of them on graduation day, and we're going to be proud every month for the rest of our natural lives. I get very passionate about this one. I had to schedule 45 minutes to get on the phone today with the woman from Great Lakes and the 800 number to renegotiate our Parent Plus loan. Actually, there was no renegotiation to it. We're the only nation, John Kennedy said that to govern is to choose. We're the only nation on the planet that has chosen to saddle you and every graduating cohort of our kids with a lifetime of debt. That's not good for our economy. And that is why I've put forward a plan, and unlike the other candidates, I actually did this. In our state, we went 4 years in a row without a penny's increase to college tuition. I have put forward a plan to move us to debt-free college within 5 years as an option for every American family again. It's what's best for our common good. It's what's best for our economy. And third, the third area where action rather than words is required is in meeting the great challenges of our times. I want to just touch on two of them, and maybe we'll talk about, there's no doubt a lot more. We'll talk about them in questions and answers. One of those challenges, driven home so vividly for all of us with the attacks in Paris, is that in your lifetime, the nature of conflict and warfare on this planet have fundamentally changed. No longer are wars fought between nation states, standing armies in a field. I mean, when we defeat ISIL, and we will defeat ISIL. There will be no surrender ceremony on the decks of the battleship Missouri. You know, this new era of asymmetrical warfare challenges us in some pretty fundamental ways as a democracy. We have to be more collaborative than we have ever been, more adaptive than we have ever been, recognizing that when we act with our military in places like Iraq and Syria, that we can only be effective when working in coalition. Yes, we have superior technology, we have great special ops teams, but we need other countries to join us in this coalition to defend what we might refer to as the global commons from this rising cancer of evil that is ISIL. And in confronting ISIL and their ability to attack way beyond Syria and Iraq, we have to think and remember the metaphor, the best metaphor I can come up with is an immune system, right? An immune system is strong not because it outnumbers the bad germs in this world. It's strong because it's better connected. It's better coordinated. Dismantling ISIL outside of Syria and Iraq is a lot more like dismantling a drug organization, something we also haven't learned to do very well yet as a nation. But if we do and meet this challenge, we can make our homeland far, far safer. Second big challenge, and then I'd like to hear from you. The second big challenge of our time, and many would say it's the first, is the challenge of climate change. The greatest business opportunity to come to the United States of America in 100 years. And I am the first candidate, and let's hope not the last, to put forward a plan to move us to a 100% clean electric grid by 2050 and create 5 million jobs along the way. And when I talk about this in Iowa, anybody from Iowa here? No? That's a shame because, boy, you guys have really important family if you're in Iowa. When I talk about this in Iowa, people nod their head. Does not sound like pie in the sky. Because, get this, and it wasn't true 15 years ago, but 30% of the electricity used in Iowa actually comes from Iowa wind, an industry they built just in the last 15 years. That's without even having a national government declaring it an economic and national security imperative. We did not land a man on the moon with an all-of-the-above strategy, right? It was intentional. It was an engineering challenge. So too is this an engineering challenge. Nor did we leave the Stone Age behind us because we ran out of stones, right? These times, the size of our population on this planet, your awareness of the finite nature of resources, including the air we breathe, calls upon us to rise to this engineering challenge. These are the ambitions that are worthy of a great people. These are the ambitions that are worthy of us as citizens of the United States and as thinking, rational, caring citizens of this planet. I have put forward 15 strategic goals to move our nation forward in the years ahead. And what, my public policy friends, is the difference between a dream and a goal? A deadline. A deadline. Cutting deaths from gun violence in half in the next 10 years. Eradicating childhood hunger in the United States within the next 5 years. Cutting youth unemployment in half in the next 3 years by making universal service an option for every kid in the United States. National service, a universal option for every kid in the United States. These are the things that will actually move our country forward. I'll leave you with this final thought. Look, there's when giving a talk in Iowa, two final thoughts. In Iowa, they meet every candidate like 2 or 3 or 4 times, sometimes 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times. And when I was in Fairfield, a woman came up to me and said, "Mr. O'Malley, this is my 3rd time seeing you." I said, "Well, thank you. How am I doing?" She said, "You're doing very well. I'm seeing a lot of growth." I said, "Well, is that the way you decide who you're going to support?" And she said, "Well, as a matter of fact, my husband and I try to see as many of you as many times as possible, and whichever one grows the most in the course of the process is who we vote for." So I guess that's not a bad way, huh? Growth can be a good thing, especially if it's the kind of growth that leads to deeper understanding of the connections we share, of the responsibilities we have to one another, and the opportunities that lie ahead if we make better choices. Like there's a lot of folks who say to me, man, you're facing a tough fight. I say to them that there's a lot of people that would look at you and say that you have a tough fight, being able to give to your kids and grandkids a future with more opportunity than you've been given. Well, you know what? I kind of like a tough fight. I've always been drawn to tough fights. I think the tough fights bring out the best in us. I think the tough fights might be the way the hidden God has of telling us we're actually fighting for something worth saving. The American dream is worth saving. Your children and grandchildren's futures are worth saving. Our country's worth saving, and this planet is worth saving. I am in this to win this. I need your help. Leadership's an important thing, and our country's best days are still in front of us. Help me in this campaign. Together we will cross that threshold into a new era of American progress, and it will be an era that this world needs now more than it ever has before. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Hey, now the fun part.
Now the fun part. All right, so with that, we'll open the question and answers. If you could just stand and give your name and hometown, that'd be great. All right?
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Morgan Falls, and I'm a second-year MPP originally from Lakewood, Colorado. And as you know, there's recently yet another violent attack in Colorado, which is 3 just in the course of my lifetime. You talk a lot about being the guy that will do something about gun violence and gun control, and you have your record from Maryland, but how do you think that you're different? How can you make something happen at the national level?
Yeah, thank you. And you have a beautiful state, and it has been marked by a lot of tragedies. I believe that actually the people are way ahead of their politicians on this score. And I also believe that those of us who are leaders have a responsibility to bring people together to forge a new consensus. And that's what I intend to do in the course of this Democratic primary. That's what I intend to do by talking about this in the general election. And not just talking about it in states where it's popular, you know? There are profound differences on this issue between what I have to offer as a candidate and Secretary Clinton and Senator Sanders. I'm doing this as if we're all still on that debate stage. They are. I can see them in my sleep. Senator Sanders actually voted to give the gun manufacturers and gun dealers immunity. Senator Clinton, for her part, kind of goes back and forth, shifting like a weather vane. And the great Thomas Jefferson himself said that, I haven't even done, the great Thomas Jefferson himself said that in matters of fashion, swim with the current, but in matters of principle, stand like a rock. Secretary Clinton flipping back and forth on this, depending on the election year, doesn't help us forge a new consensus. I have been very clear about this because I'm clear about my principles and the principles that unite us as a people. Imagine what sort of lengths we would go to as a nation if, since the attacks of September 11th, 400,000 Americans had not been killed by guns in the hands of other Americans, but had been killed by guns in the hands of ISIL or ISIS. I mean, one nitwit with a failed shoe bomb attempt, and we're all standing in lines at the airport forever and ever. But what's the change in our gun policies with all of these mass shootings after mass shootings? So look, I intend to take on the NRA. I've shown that I have the backbone to do that. And the other thing that I've shown the ability to do is bring people together to get difficult things done. When we passed comprehensive gun safety legislation in my own state, it was not without a huge amount of opposition. I mean, the halls of Annapolis were jammed for 2 days. When the NRA wrote to everybody in our state, all of their members, to tell them that my legislation, which was a governor's priority, put my neck out there to get it done. Lots of my advisors said, don't do it. It'll fail. You'll own it. You'll wear it. I said, I don't care. You know, real leadership is about making yourself vulnerable to forge a new consensus. When they wrote to their members and told them falsehoods about our bill, I pulled every hunting license of every hunter in Maryland. And I wrote to them myself on governor's stationery with stamps. And I said, thank you for being a hunter. We really need you to continue your hunting traditions. Thank you for renewing your permit. Without you, we wouldn't be able to keep our open space as a state. Now let me tell you about the lies the NRA is telling you about the gun safety legislation. And we got it done. Had to overcome my own party's opposition to do it. There's no magic wand here. But there is a magic that comes about when people are honest, when they're truthful, when they make themselves vulnerable for a higher truth. And that higher truth is this: no other nation on the planet buries as many of our sons and daughters from guns and gun violence as we do as a country. Terrorists have an easier time buying combat assault weapons in the United States than they do in any other developed country. So I intend to speak to that common sense, and I intend to get it done, and I intend never to relent until we do get it done. And in the course of doing that, we'll also build a larger public consensus, because they could have sent it to referendum to try to overturn it in Maryland. But the reason they didn't is because in the course of the conversation, we had built up so much public consensus that it would have been futile. And that's what we need to do as a nation. I'm going to try to be shorter in my answers so we get in more questions.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Catoon. I'm from Bristow, Virginia. I also have a question about gun violence. While I respect all of the legislation that you have tried to do to promote gun control.
I didn't just try.
So in 1996, the NRA feared that the CDC was using gun violence research to promote gun control legislation. And since then, almost no substantive funding for gun violence research has been allotted to the CDC in the past 19 years. In 2013, Obama issued an executive order to the CDC to complete gun violence research and has been denied funding repeatedly by Congress. If you become president, what will you do in the face of a gridlocked Congress to promote gun control violence research?
Yeah, there's like two questions in your one question. Look, there have been attempts to cut off research into climate change, and that's what happens when our House of Representatives is no longer representative. There's a number of things we need to do to heal our democracy. I didn't touch on many of these, but some of them are contained in those 15 strategic goals I talked about. One of them is publicly financed congressional elections within the next 5 years. We turn our congresspeople into telemarketers. The second thing I believe we need to do is have bipartisan redistricting commissions. I mean, the way districts have been gerrymandered, and hey, look, the shapes of the state of Maryland's map are not particularly square. But that doesn't mean it's the best way forward for our country. We need to find a way to strengthen what de Tocqueville called the strength of our soft ties, to be able to talk with one another and not pass one another. Part of the call of your question is not only restoring, which I'm for, and I would do everything I can to restore research dollars, not just for that. I mean, since I graduated from college, we've about cut in half what we invest as a nation in non-defense discretionary things like research and development. We need to get that back up, including on these pressing public health issues. But really, the call of your question is, how are we going to govern ourselves, right? How are we going to restore that fabric of trust that allows us to have differences of opinion but still find common ground? And I don't think that there's an easy button or a way to pole vault over this problem. But I can tell you as an executive, unlike Secretary Clinton, as governor, I would never, ever have said something like, all Republicans are my enemy, or I'm proudest that all Republicans are my enemy. Some of the things we got done, like marriage equality or, what was the other one? Repealing the death penalty, we only got done with some Republican votes. I worked very hard to make sure that we created some opportunities to break bread with our Republican brothers and sisters, got to know them, My head of legislative affairs said to me once at a bipartisan pizza night at the governor's mansion, he said, why do you invite Senator so-and-so? He's always trash talking you on the floor. He votes against all of our stuff all the time. Why do you invite him? I said, well, Joe, it's only pepperoni. We've become very good, given our technology, at talking only to people that we want to talk to, or people that think like us, or to get our news sources only from news sources that we find speak to us. We somehow need to rediscover that ability to listen and to hear and to meet each other on common ground. And that's the only way forward for our country. And I don't think that we're going to be able to move us forward. And this is why I run, ladies and gentlemen. We're not going to move our country out of these rather divided, gridlocked times by either resorting to the proven economic failure of socialism on the one hand, or by turning back the page and electing a very polarizing figure from our more recent past. We get through these times with new leadership. And that's what I believe the country is looking for, not only on this issue, but on a whole host of issues.
Hi, I'm Diane DaCosta from Howard County, Maryland.
All right.
Okay. My question is regarding climate change, and you recognize that the younger generation believes in climate change, know it's a real thing, but how do we communicate that? How do we communicate that to the older generations and those who disbelieve the data?
You guys have to do that. Look, I'm counting on you, in fact, to do that. I said I think in passing, that I rarely meet young Americans under 30 that deny that climate change is real, or that think it should be brushed off with lame excuses, or think their president shouldn't be doing something about it. I'm very proud of what President Obama is doing on our behalf in Paris. That's American leadership. There are other ways to lead in this world than at the opposite end of a drone strike. And so, but look, as one practitioner in the art of the possible and in the public arena of discourse and understanding, this is one mistake that I think we've made, those of us who believe in climate change. As Democrats, we believe in science. But in our belief in science, sometimes we are so eager to connect the dots of science that it draws us in a straight line right to hell. And it's hard to make an appeal from a standpoint of despair and expect people to rally to it. So I think one of the ways we build a broader consensus and convince those that think this isn't really something government should worry about, or that free markets, genuflect when you say free markets, are going to fix this, is I think we have to wrap this in its proper framework of prosperity. More jobs, not less. More opportunity, not less. There is today in your country, already today, without us really breaking a sweat as a nation, more people employed in a relatively new solar and wind industries combined than there is in the extraction and burning of coal. That's a fact. So we need to wrap this in the prosperity framework. It can't be about all of us passing out sweaters in the winter, everybody has to turn down the thermostat and freeze. No, this is about moving to an intentional, distributed electric generating grid that's a different model than before. The old industrial, put it all in a big place, put it out over the lines. No, this is much more ecosystemic. It's about green design. It's about living buildings. It's about solar, distributed very broadly. And there's lots of things we can do to help developing nations with technology that would allow them to leapfrog over that old sort of burn the coal in one place and make electricity with it sort of thing. So it's the prosperity frame. More in the back there.
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us, Governor O'Malley. My name is Katie Brandon, and I'm from Fredericksburg, Virginia. As probably one of the few conservatives here, my main question for you is, your goals are very admirable, but what is your plan for ridding our nation of this massive debt that we've incurred over the course of these past several years? Per person, we have the most debt of any generation that's gone before us, and while we may have college debt, we also have the national debt to worry about. So what's your plan for tackling the national debt while also accomplishing these goals you've set forth?
Thank you. And it's Katie Brennan?
Brandon, yes, sir.
Brennan. Yeah, Katie, of the three candidates running in the Democratic Party, I'm the only one that had to balance a budget every single year. And when I was elected mayor of Baltimore, we had a huge... Thank you very much. And I had to do it at a time of recession. I also inherited a nearly $2 billion structural deficit that had been built up over time. I don't know if you saw the news on the other side of the river, but we put Maryland on a path so that this year now we have a surplus in Maryland. It's the first time in 20 years I can remember us not having a looming structural deficit on our horizon. How'd we do that? While also increasing education funding by 37%, making our schools #1 in America 5 years in a row, and those other things I rattled off. We did it by the combination of two things, but both of them involve math. Just like I like science, I like math. And maybe it was from being a mayor. You know, there's no lasting progress without fiscal responsibility. So I cut our budget by more than any governor in modern times in Maryland. Probably any of us who served as governor through the recession could probably say similar things with regard to their state's history. But I also made record investments in those other things, and we did it by doing it together. I asked all of our people to pay another penny on their sales tax, moving us from the 42nd lowest sales tax to the 31st lowest, but it generated $750 million a year, which went right into public education. Asked our corporations to pay another percent. I asked our wealthiest citizens, those in the top earning 14%, to pay more. And rather than it chasing millionaires south of the border, by the time I left office, the average tax burden paid by families was the same at the end of my term as it was at the beginning of my term. But we did distribute it a little more fairly because I greatly increased the earned income tax credit for lower earning families. So you ask, how do we do this as a nation? I think that if I can encapsulate it, I think it's important to realize that this debt has been caused and is driven fundamentally by a war that we were led into under false pretenses in the invasion of Iraq. And it was the first time we'd ever gone to war without being asked by our president to pay for it while we were fighting that war. And so that's all become part of our ledger. And we're going to be a while paying down that debt. But I believe that the best way to pay down that debt is to make our economy grow in inclusive ways. A stronger middle class is the cause of economic growth, not its consequence. So there's certain investments we have to make as a nation if we're going to grow our economy in ways that actually allow us to reduce that debt, which is different than the deficit, right? Deficit is now lower under President Obama than it's been at any time. The average annual deficit spending is lower than it's been at any time since Ronald Reagan was president. But in order to long-term bring down that debt and make the investments in our nation, there's one huge entitlement I believe we can no longer afford. And that is the huge entitlement that the super wealthy among us, those making $1 million or more, feel that they're entitled to pay a much lower marginal tax rate than historically they ever have in the last 80 years of the Republic's existence. I also believe that taxing capital gains at a much, much lower rate than income from sweat and hard work is also an entitlement we can no longer afford. And for the most part, I'd like to see us tax at the same rate that we tax earnings from hard work. If we did those two things, Katie, we would generate over the next 10 years $800 billion, which would go a long way to paying down that debt, as well as allowing us to do debt-free college again as a nation and make the discretionary investments in research and development and the like.
Hi, so my name's Heidi Wilder, and I'm a second-year MPP, and I'm from Gaithersburg, Maryland. So, yeah,
All right.
Another Marylander here. So you were my governor for a while as well. And I realized that, again, you're trying to raise the minimum wage, which I think is very commendable, but at the same time, you also want to increase employment. How do you actually plan to reconcile the two?
By experience. There has never been a time when raising the minimum wage reduced employment. Let me say that again. Since 1947, there has never been a time when raising the minimum wage reduced employment. That's because the more people earn, the more money they spend, and the more our economy grows. In my own state, we raised the minimum wage to $10.10. 2 of our counties raised it to $12.80, but it has not reduced employment. Instead, it's had put more money into the system. Look, I didn't expound on this too much, but and I'm not going to expound now. But it does need to be said that in an economy where 70% of economic activity comes from consumer demand, we cannot expect anything but anemic growth when 70% of us are earning the same or less than we were 12 years ago. So that's why I believe that's what's missing in our economy. I mean, look last year. Stock buybacks by corporations, which one time was illegal not too long ago, wasn't it? It was prohibited. Well, we spent about, I think it was like 4% of our GDP on stock buybacks. You can't expect businesses to invest in producing more things or more services if you don't have the greater demand from your workers. So the genius of our American fair market, American capitalism, is we've always kept a floor underneath kind of a minimum wage so that nobody who plays by the rules has to raise their kids in poverty. So I think what you're going to see played out in the experience of all of this is you're going to see a lot of cities get to a $15 minimum wage before states do or before the nation does. And I bet you will be very sore-pressed to find, I mean, sure, if you took the minimum wage and took it up to $50 an hour instead of $15, you might trip those wires. But I can assure you there's no danger of that happening. But taking it up to $15 an hour in a lot of the cities, given the cost of living in the cities, is actually going to be an economic benefit to the whole economy of those cities, and we'll see that pretty plainly here in the next few years. But there has never been a case where raising the minimum wage led to a lack of employment.
Okay, guys, with time constraints, I think we're going to do like 2 more questions. Okay, so I'll go here.
Hi, Governor O'Malley. My name is Caroline Bray, and I'm in Climate Action Society here at UVA, so I really appreciate your strong stance on climate change and green energy. Do you think that the University of Virginia should divest from fossil fuels?
Yes. Now, for those in the glass, I said yes. Students under glass. Other questions?
All right.
Hi, I'm Michelle and I'm from Alexandria, Virginia. I was wondering what your stance is on women's reproductive health and what your plan of action is, especially regarding Planned Parenthood. I know Morgan kind of referenced the shooting that had occurred just this past break. So.
Yes, I believe that there are some decisions that are best left to women and their doctors. There are some decisions that government's no good at making. So that's my position. That has long been my position. And I believe there's common ground that we can all find on things like reducing infant mortality, eradicating childhood hunger. But on those very personal decisions, government's no good at making them. And I believe that we need to rely on the individual, on women and their doctors to make those decisions themselves.
Hi, I'm Matt Greenspan, also from Alexandria, Virginia.
Hello, Matt.
I was just wondering how you plan to balance helping these new industries, for example, companies like Uber and Airbnb, the new economy, balancing that with protecting existing industries like the hotel industry and taxi drivers and things like that, and basically where the role of the federal government is for you.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, Matt. I mean, this whole notion of the shared economy. On the one hand, it's good that people can work when they want to work. Of course, perhaps if they were making better wages at work, they wouldn't feel like they need to take on a second job to work. I think what's important here is that as we move to a sharing economy, so-called, that doesn't mean that people have to give up the security that they have in the more traditional workplace setting. So certainly there's an ability in the shared economy for people to, for us to be able to figure out how to make the adjustments that allow people to have some decent sort of unemployment insurance, disability insurance if they're hurt on that job, and ways that the employer can make it easier rather than harder for people to save for their own retirement. So this is a whole new conversation I think that we need to have. How do we upgrade our national labor laws and laws that protect the security of our workers such that we can craft a more inclusive safety net, if you will, even in the context of this shared economy. And that's not a challenge for the technology, that's just a challenge for the politics.
All right, I think we're actually going to wrap that up. So once more, Governor O'Malley, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the Batten School and Batten Government Council.
Thank you guys. Thanks a lot. Thank you, man. Thanks.